Okay, we gotta talk Ahsoka, amongst other things. I think the biggest problem with Ahsoka is the fact that it is a sequel to Star Wars Rebels. It makes sense considering where Ahsoka's main story left off. It's exactly where we would pick it right back up. The plot of this TV show consists of Ahsoka and Sabine going to find Ezra, who's been taken to a galaxy far, far away.
You want to know where he is? I'll tell you where he is. He's far, far away.
But there's some bad blood between them. There's a history between master and apprentice, and that seems to be the theme that goes along throughout this entire series. But before we move on, we gotta talk about Star Wars fans. For me personally, Star Wars is my most favorite thing in the entire world. And I pride myself on being able to create the content that I make while taking such an unbiased opinion and trying to look at everything as objectively as possible. But nobody hates Star Wars more than Star Wars fans themselves. There are entire YouTube videos dedicated to just hating and nitpicking Star Wars. And there's some things to look out for when you see these biased Star Wars hate watchers. One is nitpicking, and there is a difference between nitpicking and criticism. My definition of nitpicking is when someone has an opinion over something that doesn't necessarily need to be changed, or actually changing it doesn't affect the plot or story or the merits of whatever literary device you're looking at. Second thing is they get real upset when their theory doesn't come true and they believe that their theory is the only way to watch Star Wars. I mean, some of these people really thought that Darth Maul was coming back, and I just don't see how that is something we would want to see from this, or how it even correlates to the story. The reason I bring this up is because I'm sure there are a lot of Star Wars fans out there that are seeing all the negativity about a show that they might like, and the first thing I want to say is, if you like something, whether it's objectively good or bad, that's awesome. Your opinion is valid. There are things on my channel where I've given a bad rating to, but I personally enjoy watching. And two, these hate watchers really just gotta shut the fuck up. All right, I'm off. I'm done with my soapbox. So let's get into the review. As stated before, this is a story between master and apprentice. This is also a story about overcoming grief, doubt, and kind of anxiety as a whole. Having to be able to believe in yourself and trust in others. Despite what some people might have to say, there is a plot. There is character progression that goes on throughout Ahsoka's arc, and she's picked up, or seems to have re-picked up, Sabine as an apprentice. Now, the beginning of the show starts out really slow. One, because we're re-establishing what has happened to these characters for longtime fans, but also making sure that new watchers understand what is happening. It's interesting because you can come into this show and watch it and be completely oblivious to what happened in Rebels and still be able to follow along and have different types of attachments. But the, I guess, intended way of watching this show is by knowing what happened in Rebels. And the reason why I say it is the intended way is because there are a lot of little Easter eggs and references, all down to the clothes that people wear, that suggest things have changed or suggest certain tropes are still applied to the characters that you might not catch on to if you didn't watch Rebels. It's not that you won't understand or you won't be able to keep up, but it is something of an experience that you will be missing out on. And it still fascinates me that we are still getting new Star Wars fans. A lot of people started watching Star Wars in Mandalorian, and some probably started watching it now. The main antagonists of this show, mainly I'm talking about Baylan Skoll and Shin Hati, the two that you see in the trailers that have the orange lightsaber, red hue, whatever different color you may want to call it. But they serve as, weirdly enough, a contrasting anchor to Ahsoka and Sabine, where Ahsoka and Sabine are kind of disjointed and don't really fit together that well. Baylan and Shin are at one. They understand one another, and weirdly Weirdly enough, they are the example that Ahsoka and Sabine need to become. Admiral Thrawn is also supposed to make a grand return. See what I did there? And for me, it can be a little disjointing, or I don't know. I don't like it when the plot or characters are constantly telling us how much of a tactical genius someone is, only to see them fail against our heroes because our heroes have to succeed in some way or another. So I guess I want to see more of decisive victories through Thrawn. I'm not going to say whether he wins or loses for those who haven't watched it, but it is interesting how the plot has to continue and characters are protected by the plot, but this guy is also supposed to show himself as just being better or really good at what he does while failing or succeeding. So there's that. Now I'm going to go into spoilers here and talk about the show in general. One, so I can nerd out, and two, so I can just show those nitpickers how to actually review something. Ahsoka is something I definitely recommend. If you've enjoyed other series of The Mandalorian, if you enjoyed Rebels, definitely go watch Ahsoka. It's a continuation of that. I think my biggest gripe is some of the scenes feel a little too slow. The dialogue doesn't seem to always enhance what's happening at front, and a lot of times, because there's so much dialogue between characters trying to give us exposition and catch us up on what needs to happen, it does fail to always give us an enticing viewing experience, making for the pacing at times, especially in the beginning, to just feel really boring. But it makes sure to definitely pick itself up, especially the third episode and onward. Moving into spoilers, you've been warned. First off, let's talk about the plot and story. And I've been hearing a lot of people say that there's no character progression and there's no plot to this show, or that it's all pointless. And it kind of baffles me how much sometimes people just need exposition for them. There is so much visual storytelling here, and because the beginning 2 episodes especially give so much narration and exposition on getting everyone caught up and knowing what people care for and not, whenever we do get to the meat of the show, they stop doing that exposition, which I appreciate so much. We see that Ahsoka herself is suffering from survivor's guilt, and that she herself doesn't feel worthy of training Sabine. We also see Sabine feeling very regretful of how long it's taken her to save her friend Ezra, and that attachment, that promise she has towards him is what's the driving factor for everything that she's doing, which we know as Star Wars fans leads to a very dark path. And instead of explaining and retelling the story of Anakin Skywalker, they show us what those attachments and feelings can do and how they can be a detriment to someone who's trying to be a Jedi. Sabine is unable to use the Force because she was unable to really just focus on herself. She's distracted with all her emotions, and she's not really a powerful Force wielder, which they point out many times.
Well, I discovered that according to Hu Yang, I'm the worst candidate to be a Jedi out of every Jedi he's ever known.
You told her that?
It's true.
Yet as Sabine grows and learns and sees the value of her training, that begins to change a little bit. It isn't until that she does find Ezra and she does speak to Ezra and she regrets. She's unable to even speak aloud of what she did to Ahsoka. She feels like she betrayed Ahsoka in order to fulfill her promise for Ezra. And once she's able to let go of those attachments and trust in herself, but also trust in other people and in what is the unknown, she then gains her ability, she gains her powers, and there's a lot of inferencing that can go here. And I love that they allow us to infer that situation and not just straight up tell us like, oh, well, this is how you unlock your powers. Oh, thank you for that. Ahsoka has an even longer history than Sabine, but I want to stay within the context of this show itself when speaking about it. Ahsoka was scared to train Sabine. She walked away from her, and she says that she walks away from other responsibilities as well in the past, and that she's always kind of just been running away, trying to just be a survivor. She allowed that guilt and fear to be the driving factor in a lot of her decisions, and it wasn't until that she loses her fight with the Balin Skull that she actually has to confront her fear. She has to confront her survivor's guilt. And I think this is done beautifully with Anakin Skywalker, Hayden Christensen reprising the role. And I don't think it's just fan service. I think that the one person who could help her more than anyone else showed up for her. And this has been a theme in Star Wars ever since A New Hope, when Obi-Wan speaks to Luke after he dies. Just like how Luke needed Obi-Wan's guidance more than anyone else, this is what Ahsoka needed more than anyone else. And we see just that bond between Ahsoka and Anakin, and how his training kind of rubs off on her, and how she trains Sabine in some other scenes, but also how he forces her to fight out of that survivor's guilt, that you have to go after what you want, and you can't allow fear to be a factor that drives your motivation or decision. And then we go from Ahsoka the Gray to Ahsoka the White, trusting in her more affinities and going into those areas where she's doubtful and taking a more courageous leap, where she literally enters the belly of the beast and takes that leap of faith. And that's where the trust issues between her and Sabine come along. She doesn't want Sabine to go through the same things that she went through, but she has to trust that Sabine will make the right decisions, and she doesn't have to make them for her. And it's whenever she allows Sabine to act on her own where they become more cohesive and begin to work better as a unit. And even though Sabine feels like she betrayed Ahsoka, when Ahsoka returns, it's not about that. She has to understand her pupil and understand that they're going to make mistakes, but there's only going to ever be one person for Sabine, just like how there was only ever one person for Ahsoka. Baylan by far is probably my favorite character in the show. Ray Stevenson steals the scene every time he's on screen, and it is so sad that he doesn't get to see all the love that everyone is showing towards him with his passing. But he gives a fresh new take on kind of the more villainous side of what's happening in Star Wars. So instead of just like galactic domination, instead of just, you know, evil for the sake of being evil, he kind of has a little more nuance behind it. He, again, the theme of betrayal plays with him, as he wants to stop the cycle of war that's going on in Star Wars. His own radical look on how he thinks the galaxy should be shaped, and him being radical but still taking on Jedi tendencies but acting in a more selfish manner was really cool to see. Seeing more or less a dark Jedi, not so much a Sith, but it was really neat to see how he was training Shin Hati and making all the decisions that Ahsoka should have been making for Sabine. And throughout the series, they were the ones that were more successful than Thrawn himself. Something a lot of people complained about was the choreographing. I will say this, however. I think that the choreographing in general is really good. You guys know in my reviews how I love talking about shots that don't have a lot of cuts, that stay centered and watch the fight entirely. And Ahsoka does that. There aren't cuts, and you can tell they really practice on what they were doing. But at the same time, the camera movement is static, and it's static to show off their training. I appreciate it. It isn't as dynamic or energizing as some other things that we've seen, especially with the sequel fighting, but there is this mix of sequel and prequel fighting that they've kind of married together that I do enjoy. And when people's biggest complaint about the choreographing is that the camera's standing still and it looks like they're moving really slow, I just call that nitpicking at its finest. Even though Ahsoka's line delivery is used to catch audience up for those who didn't keep up with a really long series in the past, can serve to slow things down and have really low momentum. This show captures the essence of Star Wars and experiencing something new, exploring the galaxy, exploring the Force, while also telling a story, having kind of that mythological features behind it, a lesson between allowing yourself to trust in not only yourself, but in those around you, with awesome sequences that you daydream about or you only see in cartoon versions of the show, and villains that are intriguing that you just want to see more of them, and you actually kind of want to see them win at some points. Easter eggs for hardcore fans and surprises for new fans. I recommend people to watch the show. That's why I gotta give Ahsoka an 8 out of 10. Until next time, play nice. Oh, and I nearly forgot to mention, I love how Ahsoka is being associated with the samurai aesthetic, and that their Balin had this knightly presence to him as well. The fight scenes are definitely just one taken from Akira Kurosawa films, those old black and white films, samurai movies that I just love so much. And I think that's why there was a lot more slower pace. It was more stylistic approach, something that I recognized immediately, where others just don't know when art is right in front of their face.